Welcome to the Genuinely You podcast channel, which is packed with advice and tips on how to live your life with purpose. Do you wish you felt happy and fulfilled? Are you feeling stuck, wishing things could be better? Are you ready to take some action and create the life you want? To start living an empowered life, you need to recognize and make full use of the power and freedom that comes from being genuinely you. Your host is Gina, a #1 best-selling author whose whole life has been about supporting people to achieve personal empowerment, helping people just like you recognize that they can.
Hello there, it's Gina Gardner here, and I'm really pleased to be with you on Passionate World Radio. Once again, I'm joined by Rachel Davidson, my good friend and the author of The Point of Me. And today we're going to be exploring the whole issue around purpose. And it's a very interesting theme, and I think one that's much bigger than today's programme will give us an opportunity to explore. But I think before we start, it's probably quite useful, I think, to consider that purpose is a word that we use in just so many different ways. If you think about doing things on purpose, often that's used as a pejorative thing. You've done that on purpose, you've deliberately done something. And usually when we use that, it's because somebody's done something we don't like. But I think there's an enormous strength in doing things purposefully, being mindful. Those of you that have listened to our show before will be very familiar with the concept that 95% of the things that we do are habitual. They don't actually touch our conscious mind. We are not doing them purposefully or on purpose. They're happening. And that's fine when things are going well. It's not so fine when we respond to something which has triggered an emotion or a situation that's gone on before, and we bite back, or we do things and we do them mindlessly without any purpose. And so I think to start with, it's about asking our listeners, how consciously do you do things? How much of what you say or do or don't say and do is because it's a habit. There's no actual purpose to what you're doing other than the fact it's something you've done before.
Something comfortable, yeah.
And learning to live one's life purposefully gives such a different quality to that life, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
That we have then the capacity to make active choices about how we want to be, how we want to respond to people and the world around us,
yes,
and how actually determining the quality of our thinking, which in turns determines the quality of our emotions and our behaviour and our quality of life, our relationships, pretty well everything really.
Yes.
And so I think that when you're talking about purpose, it's really important to understand that it's your choice. You have a choice how you live your life, how you speak, how you act, how you feel, really. And ultimately, being aware that it is your choice gives you such power, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I'm put in mind of Dolly Parton's, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but did she not say something along the lines of figure out who you want to be and then do it on purpose?
Yes. And I think, it's interesting. I suspect quite a lot of our listeners are people who at some point would like promotion or would like their business to be better or would like their relationship to be better. And I think that theme that, in order to get my promotion, for example, if I want to be that leader, well, rather than wait till the promotion to start behaving like a leader, start now. Be the promotion.
Yes.
Long before you get it. It'll actually come more quickly.
Yes.
Be the great partner.
Yes.
Even if your partner's being challenging.
Yes.
If you're the great partner, then you can often influence how they behave because you're responding differently. And it's that purposefulness that makes a difference. So I think it's important to recognise that living your life on purpose
Mm-hmm.
is really important.
Mm-hmm.
But that's very different to living a life of purpose, isn't it?
Yes, although the two are connected.
Absolutely.
But it is easier to live your life on purpose and less easy to live it with purpose.
Yes.
I would say.
On purpose is something that you can do at any age, and you can teach very small children to
Yes.
To be aware of the consequences of their thought processes
Yes.
and so on.
And I would say that is much more about cerebral brain and conscious thought and sort of a discipline of life, a discipline of approach to be on purpose. But to lead a purposeful life,
yes,
it is much deeper, much more soulful, a much more meaningful thing to achieve, and therefore harder to know.
It's an interesting one because many of my clients will come. It's often when people get to their, I would say, early 50s,
Mm-hmm.
they've been successful at work, they've carved out a career,
Yes.
they have the material things in life, they've got the house,
yes,
usually they've got a family,
mm-hmm.
and so they've satisfied all of those drivers that come when we are late teens, 20s and 30s to succeed.
Yeah.
And I'm using that word success in a very specific way.
Yes, well they will definitely have got that word in their head when they describe their achievements to you. They will be talking about that as a success, because many people do believe that is the point, is to be successful in that manner, and especially in the Western world where consumerism and capitalism encourage the acquiring of things to demonstrate success. That tends to be how we're brought up and told is the definition of a successful person.
But interestingly, if you look at people who have been successful at every level in terms of how people measure it from the outside, healthy bank balance, big car, big house, an apparently successful family, that they will come and say, there's something missing. Yes. I don't feel fulfilled.
Yes, I wrote a character in my book, The Point of Me, a key character, who on the face of it is very successful. He's got lots of power at work, lots of money, lots of influence. He gets to wield his massive intellect. And yet, on another, arguably, certainly this was my point in writing the character, on a much more important level, he's totally emotionally bankrupt. And I enjoyed writing that character from that point of view, because I really wanted to make the point that for a lot of people he was the epitome of success, and yet for the people that really mattered in the story I was writing, he was useless.
Yes. For me, I think it's the balance between, we call ourselves human beings. Most of us are actually human doings.
Yeah.
That we feel good about ourselves because we can see outward measures of success that are recognised by society as a whole.
Yes.
When it comes down to being satisfied with who we are, and having a sense that just as we are enough, then there seems to be a very significant mismatch for lots of people.
Yes.
And that they feel good about themselves when they're busy, particularly if they're doing things that give them accolades, recognition of whatever sort. But it's being used as a way to fill that space.
Yes.
And the problem is, the second you stop being busy, that space feels as if it expands.
Yes.
And I think the first layer, if you like, of having a life that is full of a sense of purpose is actually being comfortable, loving who you are.
It's a really difficult journey. I can see it in my teenage daughter, who is just on the cusp of picking options to go forward and specialise in certain subjects in her secondary school. And she is asking questions, therefore, because the pressure is being placed upon her to make choices of, well, what do I want to do in life? And, she's aged 13.
Very early, isn't it?
It is
Too
very
early.
early.
Too early.
It's quite. When I was going through a similar stage. I was at least 2 years later on, I think, age 14, rising 15, when I had to make those choices. And I can remember still think back then thinking, I have no idea what I want to do. But the education system is sort of trying to. I understand why it does this, but it's trying to say, pick good choices for what you want to learn in now, because it will obviously influence what you go on to do in life. But on the other hand, at 13, she's questioning and feeling bad about herself because she doesn't know what she wants to do. And she's very jealous of people who in her peer group are saying, oh, I want to be a vet. And of being very firm about, where they want to go. I want to be a doctor, I want to be this. And she comes back and she says, well, I don't know what I want to be. I don't know what I want to do.
But isn't it interesting how we focus on the career?
We focus on the doing, don't we? Yeah.
Rather than, I'd like to be a loving, good person.
There you go. So I'm very tempted to respond to her in those terms of saying it doesn't really matter what you end up doing in life. It's the purpose that you've got behind it. But these are I often get dismissed as, oh, mum, stop talking to me about life. Type of conversation. So I hesitate from lumping her with all of that. But it is very true that really, ideally, what we ought to be talking to the youngsters about is, what kind of person do you want to be? What are values that are important to you?
But it's interesting when you talk to people who are in their 50s or 60s or 70s, and I've had clients who come because they have this sense of emptiness despite having had a fulsome and successful career, that they ultimately recognise that there is something missing.
Yeah.
And that something missing, I think, starts off with being a sense of self.
Yes.
And then how do we fit into this broader world?
Yes.
What is our purpose? Because by ourselves, we have value.
Yes.
Lots of people don't recognise that. But I think where that begins to be something that's very much more spiritual, if you like, is how do we impact on the world?
Yes.
And, one of the things that people talk about is, what's my legacy going to be?
Yeah.
How am I going to leave this world? How will people remember me?
Yes.
Because I think perhaps around 50 you start to recognise your own mortality, which you certainly generally don't in your teens, 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
You think you're invincible, don't you?
Yeah, and that's a natural cycle of growing up, isn't it? And we talk about life stages, and for me it's very closely linked to the 7 stages of spiritual life.
Yes. And we've spent quite a lot of time discussing that over the time, haven't we?
We do. But essentially, there are definite moments as you're growing up, as you're maturing, as you are connecting to your humanity, as even as a baby, that moment when you realise that you are an individual is definite. There's not just a sort of a psychological thing going on there. There's a spiritual level of progress, and therefore the purpose of life on earth in that sense. So there are definitely moments where you come and you realise that all of that ego pushing forward, that sort of what will I be in the world, and it's all about you and the acquiring of stuff. So we've spoken about, I've got the big house, I've got the cars, I've got the family, I've got everything that the accoutrements of a successful life. And yet I still need something more, and that's a definite phase. And some people, hit it early 40s. Some people will get to it later. But I think everybody will go through that sense of questioning, and that is about, ultimately, as humanity, we're put on this earth not just to acquire and use stuff. We're put here to be and to give out.
Isn't it interesting? Because if you look at people through history who have certainly given the message that they have true fulfilment, people like Mother Teresa, it's done, and there is nothing about material goods at all. It is about, for them, that their purpose has been found through service to others.
What was it? What's the quote from the Bible? It is harder for a rich man to pass through the
eye of a needle
than to enter the gates of heaven. And I think that is a message for people to consider the fact that acquiring stuff is great, and definitely, if you want to do it, it's brilliant. If you don't want to do it, it's also fine. but it's not the whole point. You will get to a point, and even sitting on many millions, trillions of dollars, you're still actually, at the end of the day, going to end up at the same place as the poorest man.
Absolutely, you can't take anything. There's no pockets in shrouds, is another saying.
No.
And isn't it interesting that many of the very, very wealthy people in the world, Bill Gates, for example, have recognised that actually money in and of itself is nothing. It's what you do with it.
Yes.
And how can you make a difference within the world. Now, do you need to have loads of money in order to make a difference? No, you don't. You can make a difference to everybody. I mean, even something as simple as smiling at people and making contact with your neighbours. There was a television programme on a couple of days ago, and people had lived in the same road for 20, 30 years. They didn't know the name of the person who lived at the back of their garden, at the next door but one. And there was a crisis around pest control, which brought everybody together. And suddenly they were talking, and there were two neighbours who had lived next door to each other for 37 years.
Wow.
And they had never spoken.
Wow. Okay.
And their fences adjoined each other.
Right.
And I think we live, a lot of us, particularly in the Western world, live in a society where we've lost contact with how important it is that other people and how we interact with other people is. We're so busy being busy that it's very, very easy to lose that. But what a difference that makes when you do make a contact with somebody else.
If you think about the more sort of natural tribal beginnings of human society, where people navigated towards their innate skills, and therefore that was their purpose, and they lived in a very close-knit community.
Well, you couldn't survive, could you, if you didn't live in a close-knit community? Survival was impossible. You couldn't gather food, you couldn't protect yourself, you couldn't procreate. And so the most devastating thing that anybody could do to a person was to say you're banished. Because that was certain death. And, they know in Western medicine, they know that people who live isolated lives have all sorts of immune problems, that their blood pressure is likely to be higher, their life expectancy is definitely less. So, the interesting thing for me is that we've got more information than we have ever had available to us. We know the importance of these things, and yet I would say that the sense of dissatisfaction, of loneliness, of feeling, is this it? What's the point? Has never been higher.
Because I ultimately believe that everybody's purpose for life here is to develop compassion and connection.
I would agree.
And to take the whole human race forward with compassion and love. And no matter what you end up doing and what your particular tool is, and that goes down to, well, you've got skills in this particular area, I think ultimately that movement of compassion and love and connection is really what everybody's purpose is. It's very easy for me to sort of sit and say that, because, reality of life is much harder, and you end up having to figure out how to do stuff. But I think ultimately that's what we would put here for.
I think that's true, and I think a number of levels, whatever you do, pretty well, although there are probably some professions where it might be more difficult to create that sense, is doing it to the best of your ability, and to recognise that you can be loving and compassionate to not only people but to the environment, to animals, to humanity as a whole. And if you look at what's going on in the world, we live in incredibly troubled times, don't we? Every night you watch the news and you see that in some part of the world there is difficulty. And I think lots of people think, well, I can't influence that. So if I can't influence that, what value do I have? And I think that for us, it's ultimately, there are things that we can influence, first and foremost ourselves. And then we can influence our immediate circle. But I think one of the things that fascinates me is there's now more and more experiments. I think it's Lynn Taggart who has done experiments where she's got large groups of people to meditate.
Yeah.
And in the places where they have meditated, the crime, whilst they're meditating and for a little while after, the crime rate's gone down.
Yes.
The number of people, suffering sudden illness has gone down. And you have to ask yourself, well, is there any other reason why that would happen other than you had large numbers of people whose intent was loving?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think, we lose sight of our actions, our thoughts. All of those have an energetic message that gets sent out there. And, by managing ourselves in a particular way, we can influence what goes on.
But I can hear my teenage daughter sort of in my head here, sort of saying, "Well, that's all very well and good, Mum, but how do I figure out what to do?" And what do you say when you've got clients who come to you and say, "I feel purposeless"? How do I identify what's going to give me that meaning in life?
I think first and foremost, people have to recognise that they are enough as they are. Creating that relationship with themselves where they simply, it's simple and it's very complex, but where they recognise that just as they are, wobbly bits and all, flaws and all, that we are actually a reflection of God. We are a perfect machine, if you like. How many people think about, I must replace the cells in my nails or my skin, or, unless you've got a breathing problem, most of us don't give breathing a thought. Our digestive system, as we eat, breakfast, we don't think I must send a message to my stomach and say, pulverise it and create the child and so on. We are the most amazing piece of kit, really. So complex, but we take it for granted. And then, the recognition that we actually do have power over our thoughts if we choose to have. And of course it takes a bit of practice because people have got into the habit of not.
And breaking habits is hard, but it's worth it.
But what I find fascinating, if you look at little children, tiny children, toddlers, babies and toddlers, they're very conscious of the world around them. They're curious, they're playful. They don't spend time asking their parents, does my bottom look big in my nappy? Are my thighs chunky? Do you love me? They just take it as read, don't they?
Yes.
Something happens as children get older and have exposure to other people, that they suddenly start to compare themselves and find themselves wanting.
Yes, and that is a necessary part. That is definitely part. I don't believe anybody goes through life without having those moments of doubt and trouble and contemplation.
But that's where the growth happens.
And because in those cracks the light comes in and you get to choose, because you do have control of your thoughts, you do get to choose the kind of person that you want to be and the kind of person that is going to do. And in that questioning of what am I going to do, what am I going to be, is where your growth as a person, as a valuable person to yourself and to the community and at large, that's where it happens. That is the part of growing up.
So for me, the first and the most important thing is to give people, and this can happen when you're 10 or a teenager. I've got clients where we're starting this at age 60, where it's beginning to create a relationship with themselves, where it's built on self-confidence, not about ego. It's not about I've got, in order for me to feel good about myself, I've got to be better than you. It's about I can feel good about myself because I happen to be me. And one of the things I find very interesting is that when you ask people to give you give me 5 things that you really like about yourself, they'll often struggle. Ask them to find 5 things that they don't like about themselves, and they'll give you a list of 573 things. And, So part of it, in the first instance, having a sense of true purpose is to be comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, and I think there are people on this earth that do get comfortable like that, and they tend to be thought of as geniuses and prodigies. I mean, I'm thinking of Mozart.
Well, actually, I'm going to disagree with you, because I don't think Mozart was comfortable with himself, and I think that's one of the reasons why his lifestyle was as it was. This is not about this is not about intellect.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Your intellect is part of it, and you may be very pleased with your intellect or not. But it's about recognising that whoever you are, whatever your intellectual value, your business value, you have a value in and of yourself. And that, the way in which you live your life, if you live your life with purpose, and that you recognise that you can make a difference not only to yourself but to others, I think that's where being comfortable in your own skin and having a sense that you're living a life of purpose comes very strongly to the fore. For me, and listeners may disagree, but for me, living a life of purpose includes being of service. That if you can be purposeful as an individual, but it's in the how you respond, how you interact with other people, what you see as doing things that will help or make other people feel better about themselves. Whether it's people or animals, or your passion is the environment, and that you want to do something to leave the world in a better place than it was when you arrived.
But how did you come to that clarity of, this is my purpose? Then when I am of service, I feel good about myself and I feel fulfilled, and that my life has meaning. How did you come to that?
I think it's a number of levels, and I think it's important that I make the point that it's not about my life only has purpose if and when I'm doing things for other people. Because I think there are some whose own needs are completely consumed by the needs of others, because that's how they feel good about themselves. And that's why you have to start with being comfortable with who you are, and liking and loving who you are
and
first.
Being balanced in your approach.
So once you are doing that, and they're not, I do this and then I do that, I think they run concurrently. But then when you're doing service for other people, that you're making a difference to other people, that's when I think you can get a huge sense of, I'm on track. This feels fulfilling. There's a rightness about this that fills me up. And in my filling myself up, I can use the overflow. And I think that's where the difference comes between being of service in order to feel good for me. You're using your inner resources. Being of service and feeling good about yourself is about using your overflow, so it never runs out and you don't run yourself ragged and dry. So for me, some of that has been experience, and I've been very privileged that all my working life has been around helping to empower other people, and that's always given me a huge sense of fulfilment. Some of it's come from studying and modelling other people and looking at what they've done and taking on some of their experience.
Being inspired and admiring.
Some of it is just trial and error. That some things that that I've tried don't have any impact, or actually don't make me feel good at all, or don't make me feel good in the sense of fulfilled. And I think it's important to be very clear about. People can eat a cream cake or go shopping or take drugs and they feel good in and of that moment. I'm talking about sustained.
A more lasting, a more deep, meaningful.
And for me, I suppose it's been part of my spiritual journey, which is just really in its infancy. I think it's a lifelong thing, that recognising that there is a higher power. Now, whether people think that higher power is through religion or through faith or through a sense of wonder, that's down to the individual. But for me, I believe passionately that a lot of the work that I do, I'm tapping into something that's much more powerful than me.
Yes.
And if I get out of the way, then
yes.
that sense of intuition, that sense of, understanding
Empathy.
what's needed, empathy, all of those things comes from having that connection.
Yeah, and people will talk about, their higher self, their highest version of themselves, and that has meaning in a spiritual sense, as well as just in a day-to-day sense of, be the best that you can be, and all these sort of aspects and stuff. I was reading a blog by a chap called Paul Dunn, who's a very interesting guy in and of himself. His blog was about talking into your smartphone every morning. The first question you ask yourself when you get up is, I am getting up today to do. I am getting up today to be. And in doing that on a regular basis, you whittle it down to actually, what is it, the point? What do you get to do in your life that gives you that joy, gives you that sense of being sustained, of being fulfilled, and therefore being capable of compassion and connection? Yeah. And slowly your purpose starts to become clear if you do that on a... But it's a hard one to do. It really is. And it changes.
And I think it's a theme that we'll revisit, because there's so much that we could talk about here. And when we discussed the programme, we were going to talk about sense of purpose in business, and we've run out of time. Thank you very much for being with us today. If you would like Rachel's book, The Point of Me, that's available on Amazon. A free download of my book, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfilment. And there's much more around purpose and fulfilment in the book. If you go to www.thethrivetribe.com/radio, then you'll find the opportunity to download the book for free. Loads of free resources on the website, which is www.genuinely-you.com. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you. Bye now.
You've just been listening to another great Genuinely You podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Genuinely You is a culmination of Gina's work, spanning over 30 years, of helping people learn what makes them feel happy and truly fulfilled, and how to achieve it. Please visit genuinely-you.com today to find out more.